During a recent interview, Steph Curry spoke about something many fans didn't know about his father, Dell Curry. What he revealed left even the most seasoned fans emotional. Some stories deserve to be told not for what they mean to sports, but for what they mean to humanity, said the ESPN host while introducing the special segment about the Currys. The camera then focused on Steph's face, normally radiant with his characteristic smile, now thoughtful, as if navigating memories he rarely shared. Charlotte, North Carolina, 1990. A modest house in the suburbs with a driveway that ended in a slightly tilted basketball hoop. It was there that all the magic began, long before the spotlights, the NBA championships, and the three-point records. Dell Curry would arrive home late after games with the Charlotte Hornets. On nights like that, most parents would collapse exhausted into bed. But not Delaware. Steph, only 8 years old, would already be waiting at the entrance. Even with his body aching after 48 minutes of professional play, Dell would walk to the garage and turn on a small lamp that illuminated only the area under the basket. "My father never talked much," narrated Steph, his soft voice contrasting with the intensity with which he plays. "He taught me basketball without grand motivational speeches. It was all about consistency and work." Those moments under the yellowish light of the garage formed the fundamentals not only of Steph's perfect shot, but of his character. Dell wasn't a man of many words, but he transmitted his most important lessons through actions. "He never told me you'll be great someday. Instead, he showed me, day after day, what dedication meant," confessed Steph. There was a ritual between them that was never documented by any camera. Before each home game Dell played, he would find Steph in the corridors of the arena, away from the lights and the public. There, he would crouch down until his eyes were level with his son's and simply say, "Watch the game, not just the points." Steph would nod, as if receiving a sacred secret. I would sit on the bench near the exit to the locker room, and while everyone cheered with each three-pointer my father made, I was studying his positioning, how he moved without the ball, how he communicated with his teammates, recalled Steph, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if he could see those memories unfolding. What few knew was that Dell frequently sacrificed his hours of rest to work with Steph. After night games, when the boys should have been sleeping, Dell would meet him in the garage, still in his suit, just with his tie loosened. "Many times I wanted to ask if he wasn't too tired," said Steph with a nostalgic smile. "But something told me not to question it. Those moments were too precious to be interrupted with doubts." It was on one of those nights that Dell made the promise Steph would never forget. After a particularly difficult training session, when young Curry was frustrated about not being able to perfect a move, Dell placed his hands on his son's shoulders and spoke the words that Steph would carry throughout his life. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Talent may fail, but work doesn't. You don't need to be me. You just need to be the best version of yourself." Steph paused, visibly moved. In that moment, he freed me from the expectations of being Dell Curry's son. As the first chapter of the interview came to an ayuadib end, a rare image was shown. Dell Curry, normally stoic and controlled in the stands, being captured by a camera at the exact moment he whispered to himself while watching Steph play for the first time in the NCAA. "This kid is going far beyond what I dreamed." What nobody knew yet was that that phrase carried a much greater weight than any fan could imagine. The truth behind those words would only be revealed years later, when Steph finally decided to share the side of his father that the world never knew. The Charlotte Christian School gymnasium was almost empty when Dell Curry entered to watch another basketball practice. He sat discreetly in the stands, observing his son Steph, then 16 years old, among visibly taller and more physically developed players. "I never had the typical physique for basketball," admitted Steph during the interview. "At that time, I looked 2 years younger than my teammates. Coaches looked at me and saw only a skinny kid with a famous surname." What many didn't know was that Dell was living his own internal battle. As a former professional player, he recognized his son's exceptional talent, but also understood better than anyone the almost insurmountable obstacles that Steph would face one night after a particularly difficult game. "My father did something that surprised me," said Steph with teary eyes. "He took me to a drive-thru, ordered 2 milkshakes, and parked the car in an isolated place. I expected a motivational speech, but what I received was something much more valuable." Dell took a deep breath and did what many parents would have avoided. He was brutally honest with his son. "He told me, 'Steph, you have a gift for this game that I never had. Your court vision, your hand-eye coordination, your sense of timing. They're extraordinary. But I need you to understand one thing. The world will doubt you at every step. Not because you're not good enough, but because you don't look like what they expect. And the question you need to answer is not whether you can prove them wrong, but whether you would continue playing, even if you never could." Steph remained silent, sipping his milkshake while absorbing his father's words. "That was the first time my father shared his own insecurities with me," revealed Steph. "He told me how, throughout his career, he carried the fear of not being good enough, even when he was among the best shooters in the league, how he questioned his place in the locker room after every bad game. It was the first time I saw my father not as Dell Curry, the NBA player, but as a man with vulnerabilities. This conversation marked a turning point in the relationship between father and son." Dell had decided that instead of protecting Steph from harsh reality, he would prepare him to face it. When the college recruitment process began, Steph's frustration was palpable, despite his exceptional performance in high school. Major universities systematically ignored him. Virginia Tech, where Dell had been a legend, offered only a walk-on position, no scholarship. "What many people don't know is that my father turned down an important position as a sports commentator at that time," revealed Steph. "It was a lucrative contract with a major network, but he declined it. Because he knew he would need to be present at all my games at Davidson, Dell's decision wasn't just about supporting his son. It was a silent acknowledgement that Steph was about to embark on an unprecedented journey and would need an emotional anchor who truly understood the weight of expectations." During Steph's years at Davidson, away from the spotlight of national media, Dell became a constant presence. Not to instruct or push, but simply to be there. Steph remembered those late-night calls. "I was questioning everything, my decisions, my future, whether I was even on the right path," he said. His father, a man of few words, would just listen, sometimes for hours. He didn't jump in with advice. He simply gave Steph room to think things through for himself. The turning point came during the 2008 NCAA tournament. Davidson, a small, overlooked college, was up against Georgetown, a basketball giant. No one thought Davidson stood a chance. Before the game, Steph's father sent him just one message: "Remember who you are. not who they expect you to be. That night, Steph Curry delivered a performance for the ages, dropping 30 points and leading one of the greatest upsets in March Madness history. When the final buzzer rang, cameras caught Dell Curry in the stands, tears streaming silently down his face. Later, when the arena had emptied out, Steph found his father waiting in a quiet hallway. With a voice barely above a whisper, Dell pulled him in for a hug and said, "I was wrong, Steph. Not about your talent, but about your limits. You don't have any." What Steph wouldn't learn until years later was that Dell had quietly saved every rejection letter from colleges that didn't offer his son a scholarship, not as reminders of failure, but for something far deeper. But as a testimony to the resilience that would define Steph's career, that moment in the corridor wasn't about basketball, concluded Steph. It was about a father recognizing that his son had found his own identity beyond the shadow of the Curry name. What none of the millions of fans who watched that improbable Davidson run could know was that behind the scenes, Dell Curry was facing his own silent battle, one that he would keep secret for the next few years, even as the spotlights began to shine intensely on his son. Steph Curry's entry into the NBA wasn't the fairy tale that many imagine in retrospect. Selected as the 7th pick by the Golden State Warriors in 2009, he quickly faced his first major obstacle: recurring ankle injuries that threatened to derail his career before it truly began. "That was the darkest period of my professional life," confessed Steph. "In the interview, I questioned everything: whether my body could handle the NBA, whether the critics were right about my physique, whether I had made a mistake believing I could go so far." What few knew was that while Steph faced these doubts, Dell Curry was waging his own battle behind the scenes. "I recently discovered something about my father that left me speechless," revealed Steph, his voice trembling with emotion. "During those years of injuries, while I was going through multiple ankle surgeries, my father was secretly consulting medical specialists across the country, seeking the best opinions and possible treatments." The truth, which Dell had kept for years, was even more impressive. He had mortgaged his house in Charlotte to ensure that Steph had access to the best orthopedic surgeons and rehabilitation programs in the country. During Steph's years at Davidson, away from the spotlight of national media, Dell became a constant presence, not to instruct or push, but simply to be there. Steph remembered those late-night calls. "I was questioning everything, my decisions, my future, whether I was even on the right path," he said. His father, a man of few words, would just listen, sometimes for hours. He didn't jump in with advice. He simply gave Steph room to think things through for himself. The turning point came during the 2008 NCD Day, a tournament. Davidson, a small, overlooked college, was up against Georgetown, a basketball giant. No one thought Davidson stood a chance. Before the game, Steph's father sent him just one message: "Remember who you are, not who they expect you to be." That night, Steph Curry delivered a performance for the ages, dropping 30 points and leading one of the greatest upsets in March Madness history. When the final buzzer rang, cameras caught Dell Curry in the stands, tears streaming silently down his face. Later, when the arena had emptied out, Steph found his father waiting in a quiet hallway. With a voice barely above a whisper, Dell pulled him in for a hug and said, "I was wrong, Steph. Not about your talent, but about your limits. You don't have any." What Steph wouldn't learn until years later was that Dell had quietly saved every rejection letter from colleges that didn't offer his son a scholarship, not as reminders of failure, but for something far deeper. But as a testimony to the resilience that would define Steph's career, that moment in the corridor wasn't about basketball, concluded Steph. It was about a father recognizing that his son had found his own identity beyond the shadow of the Curry name. What none of the millions of fans who watched that improbable Davidson run could know was that behind the scenes, Dell Curry was facing his own silent battle, one that he would keep secret for the next few years, even as the spotlights began to shine intensely on his son. Steph Curry's entry into the NBA wasn't the fairy tale that many imagine in retrospect. Selected as the 7th pick by the Golden State Warriors in 2009, he quickly faced his first major obstacle: recurring ankle injuries that threatened to derail his career before it truly began. "That was the darkest period of my professional life," confessed Steph. "In the interview, I questioned everything, whether my body could handle the NBA, whether the critics were right about my physique, whether I had made a mistake believing I could go so far." What few knew was that while Steph faced these doubts, Dell Curry was waging his own battle behind the scenes. "I recently discovered something about my father that left me speechless," revealed Steph, his voice trembling with emotion. "During those years of injuries, while I was going through multiple ankle surgeries, my father was secretly consulting medical specialists across the country, seeking the best opinions and possible treatments." The truth, which Dell had kept for years, was even more impressive. He had mortgaged his house in Charlotte to ensure that Steph had access to the best orthopedic surgeons and rehabilitation programs in the country. What Steph didn't know yet was that his father was facing a significant health challenge, one that he had decided to face alone, so as not to divert focus from his son's meteoric rise. "One day, I borrowed his car and found several medicine bottles in the glove compartment," revealed Steph. "It was the beginning of a conversation that would forever change my understanding of who Dell Curry really was." The third chapter of the interview ended with Steph looking directly at the camera, his eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and sadness. "I think we spend our entire lives thinking we know our parents," he said softly. "But sometimes we only discover who they really are. When we finally realize what they chose not to show us, the interview room fell into absolute silence. The cameras continued filming, but the technicians and producers behind them had stopped any movement. The interviewer leaned slightly forward, as if fearing that even his breathing could break the fragility of the moment. Steph Curry, the man the world knew for his unwavering confidence, for his easy smile, and for his ability to make impossible shots, now seemed vulnerable in a way that no one had witnessed before. "About 2 years ago," began Steph, his voice soft but firm, "I went back to Charlotte after a series of away games. I didn't tell anyone I was going." He paused, took a deep breath. "I wanted to surprise my father, maybe take him out to dinner, as we occasionally did." Steph described how he arrived at Dell's house in the early afternoon, using the key he always had. The house was quiet. He called for his father, but got no response. Eventually, he found Dell sitting alone on the back porch, staring fixedly at the backyard where an old basketball hoop still remained, now faded by time. "He didn't hear me arrive," continued Steph, "and for the first time in my life, I saw my father completely disarmed. His face was full of pain, unfiltered, raw. Not the calm, composed look he always wore in public. It wasn't masked, it was exposed." Steph felt his throat tighten. His father was holding a bottle of medication, with others scattered beside him. The moment that followed would forever redefine their relationship. When he saw me, Steph recalled, he did what he always did, tried to pull it together. He quickly hid the meds, forced a smile, acted like everything was fine. Steph shook his head at the memory. But this time, I didn't let it slide. I sat down next to him and said, "Dad, enough. Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone anymore." What came next was a confession Steph never saw coming. Shortly after retiring from the NBA, his father was diagnosed with spinal stenosis and disc degeneration. Steph's voice faltered slightly as he revealed it. Years of jumping, falling, and the constant grind of pro basketball had taken their toll. Doctors recommended multiple complex spinal surgeries, followed by a long and painful rehabilitation, with no guarantee he'd ever be free from chronic pain. Looking directly into the camera, Steph spoke the words that haunted him most. The first diagnosis came during my sophomore year at Davidson, just as my career was starting to take off. But the most profound truth was still to come. My dad made a decision back then, one I only truly understood that day on the porch, Steph continued. He chose to delay treatment. Even though doctors urged immediate surgery, he refused. He decided instead to manage the pain with medication and minimal therapy, just to stay present, to be there for me. Steph's eyes welled up when he explained Dell's reasoning. He told me he couldn't risk being in recovery during crucial moments of my career. What if I were in the hospital during your NCAA tournament? What if I couldn't be present when you were drafted? What if post-surgery medications made me too groggy to watch your first NBA games? The studio remained in sepulchral silence as Steph took a deep breath, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. When I questioned his decision, he told me something I'll never forget, said Steph, his voice almost a whisper. He said, "Steph, when you were born, I made a silent vow that I would never let my shadow darken your path. Each step of your journey would be illuminated by love, not obscured by worry." The enormity of this sacrifice only became clear to Steph when Dell finally revealed the extent of his condition. He opened his shirt and showed me the scars from epidural injections he regularly received, continued Steph. Dozens of them aligned along his spine, each one representing a day, a week, a month in which he endured pain in silence so that I could proceed without the weight of his condition. Steph then shared details that had never been publicly revealed. How Dell meticulously planned his medications so that the maximum effect coincided with the times of Steph's games. How he developed breathing techniques to control pain during long periods sitting in hard arena chairs. How he practiced neutral facial expressions in front of the mirror to ensure cameras never captured his discomfort. "There's one specific night that now haunts me," confessed Steph, his voice trembling. "Game 7 of the 2016 finals against Cleveland. We lost. It was devastating. After the game, my father came to the locker room to console me, to remind me there would be other opportunities." Steph paused, taking a deep breath. What I didn't know, what nobody knew, was that that morning he had suffered a particularly severe episode. His doctor had insisted that he go to the hospital immediately. He refused. Steph's eyes shone with contained tears. He flew to Oakland anyway, sitting on a plane for hours, refusing stronger painkillers because he wanted to be mentally present for me in case I needed him. The interviewer, visibly moved, delicately asked why Dell had chosen this path of silence and sacrifice. "When I confronted my father about this," answered Steph, discreetly wiping away a tear, "his response was simple and devastating. The moment I became your father, I decided that your journey would always be more important than mine. You were creating your story, and I didn't want my pain to become part of it." Steph then shared a particularly painful memory. After his first NBA championship in 2015, he looked for his father in the crowd to share that moment. Cameras captured the emotional embrace between them, a moment that became iconic for basketball fans. "What nobody saw," said Steph, "was that my father almost fainted from pain after that hug. He smiled for the cameras, posed for photos, gave proud interviews, and then, when no one was looking, my brother Seth helped him get to the bathroom, where he vomited from pain before taking an extra dose of medication. 15 minutes later, he was back, smiling by my side as if nothing had happened." The interview then took an even more personal turn when Steph revealed how he discovered the extent of his father's financial sacrifice. "During our conversation on that porch, I discovered something that left me completely floored," confessed Steph. "To ensure he could be present at every important moment of my career, my father refused an experimental treatment promised by health insurance. The reason? It would require 6 months of recovery at a specialized center in Denver." Steph shook his head in disbelief. "He told me it was during your rookie season. You were struggling to prove your worth. How could I disappear at just that moment?" What made this revelation even more powerful was the fact that Dell never used his condition as a tool for emotional manipulation or to gain sympathy. Many people, when going through something like this, would naturally share their struggle, not for pity, but for human connection, reflected Steph. "My father gave up even that comfort. He carried this burden completely alone for almost 20 years. As the interview progressed, Steph revealed a profound change in his relationship with his father after that afternoon on the porch. "That day, after hours of talking, we made a pact," explained Steph, now with a new firmness in his voice. "He promised to no longer hide his condition, no longer sacrifice his health for my emotional comfort, and I promised to honor his journey as completely as he had always honored mine." The first manifestation of this new pact was Dell's decision to finally have the surgery he had postponed for so long. "We scheduled the operation for the off-season," said Steph. "I remember being beside him when he woke up from anesthesia. The first thing he said was, 'I'm so relieved to not have to pretend anymore.'" Steph's eyes shone with the memory. "It was the first time I saw my father truly vulnerable, and paradoxically, he never seemed stronger to me. This transformative experience led father and son to an initiative that remained secret until that interview. We realized our story wasn't unique," explained Steph. "There are fathers and mothers across the country, across the world, making similar silent sacrifices for their children, not just in professional sports, but in all fields of human endeavor. That's how the Curry Foundation for Athlete Health and Wellness was born. With a special focus on the Silent Legacy program, an initiative dedicated to parents of athletes facing health challenges, the program provides everything from adapted transportation for parents with reduced mobility to watch their children's games, to counseling for families navigating the complex emotional dynamics of high-performance sports," detailed Steph. But the most touching element of the program was the circle of trust, support groups, where parents of athletes could openly share their own struggles, fears, and hopes. My father leads one of these groups in Charlotte, revealed Steph with evident pride. Seeing how he transformed decades of silent suffering into shared wisdom, it's deeply inspiring. The interview then culminated with a final revelation that Steph had saved until that moment. "There's something I haven't shared yet," he said, leaning forward as if confiding a secret to the world. After our conversation on that porch, I helped my father review some old boxes in the attic. We found a diary that he had kept since my first days playing basketball. Steph took a deep breath before continuing on the night before my first NBA game. He wrote something that I only discovered almost 15 years later. Steph took a small folded piece of paper from his pocket. "With his permission, I'd like to read something to you," Steph said softly. He gently unfolded the worn sheet of paper, its creases betraying how often it had been opened and read. Then, in a steady voice, he began to read the words written in his father's hand. "Today, my son Steph plays his first NBA game. This morning, the doctor told me the pain will likely never fully go away. That surgery can't wait much longer. But how can I think about that now? How can I risk missing even a single moment of this journey? The doctors don't understand. There's a pain much deeper than anything physical. The pain of not being there when your child needs you. No matter what happens to my spine, to my discs, to my body, as long as I can sit in the stands and watch my son live his dream, I will do whatever it takes. Maybe one day I'll tell him, maybe one day he'll understand, that sometimes the deepest love is the kind that stays quiet, unseen, but never absent. For now, I'll take my medicine, do my secret therapies, and sit there smiling in the crowd, as if nothing else in the world matters. Because honestly, nothing else does." As Steph finished, the studio was silent, everyone holding their breath. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. He folded the note carefully, almost reverently, and slid it back into his pocket, close to his heart. "After I found this," Steph continued, his voice steady again, "so many small memories suddenly made sense." He paused, searching for the right words. How he always picked seats close to the access tunnels. How he'd vanish for a few minutes during games. How he never went anywhere without that cushion. Steph looked up, a new clarity in his eyes. All those moments I saw him in the stands, my draft night, my first NBA game, my first All-Star game, every championship run. I see them all differently now. I don't just see a proud father, I see a silent warrior who transformed his pain into a testimony of love. In the months that followed that conversation on the porch, Dell finally agreed to undergo a series of procedures to improve his quality of life. Recovery was slow but significant. Seeing my father walking without visible pain for the first time in decades, Steph paused. Searching for the right words, it was like watching a different kind of miracle. Not the kind that happens on courts with impossible shots in the final seconds, but the kind that happens when someone finally allows themselves to receive the same love they have always given so freely. The interview was approaching its end, but Steph had one last thought to share. "You know, people often ask me what was the most important lesson my father taught me," reflected Steph, with a new depth in his voice. "For years, I thought it was about basketball, about shooting, positioning, or competitive mentality. Then I thought it was about hard work, perseverance, or faith." Steph paused, looking directly at the camera with eyes bright with emotion. "But now I know it was something much deeper. He taught me that our greatest impact comes from what we choose to do without recognition. from the battles we fight when no one is watching, from the love we give without expectation of return or acknowledgement. A single tear rolled down Steph's face, but he made no move to wipe it away. My father used to tell me that character is revealed not in what we do when everyone is watching, but in what we do when no one is looking, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Dell Curry lived that truth every day, and only now do I fully understand the depth of that legacy. The interview concluded with recent images of Dell and Steph together at a foundation charity event. Dell, now using a discreet cane, something he finally allowed himself after years of denial, and Steph, with his arm gently supported on his father's back. The contrast with their previous public appearances was notable. There was a new authenticity, a new intimacy between them. What changed wasn't just how I see my father, explained Steph in the final words of the interview. What changed was how I understand love, not as an emotion or a feeling, but as a daily decision, a constant choice to place someone's well-being above your own. As the studio lights dimmed softly, the camera captured one last image, father and son walking together out of the set, no longer as mentor and apprentice or legend and heir, but as two men who had found a new level of connection through shared vulnerability and mutual respect. The world now knew Dell Curry's true legacy. It wasn't in the three-point shooting records he established during his time in the NBA. It wasn't in his work as a commentator or in the sports statistics that would define his professional career. His true legacy was in the silent example of a father who chose to place his son's well-being and dreams above his own pain, comfort, and recognition, who found strength not in invulnerability, but in the willingness to endure whatever was necessary so that his son could shine without shadows. And perhaps that is the greatest teaching that Steph Curry continues to carry with him, now aware of the full weight of its meaning, that true greatness lies not only in the lights of the spotlights, but in the invisible foundations built through unconditional love, silent sacrifice, and unwavering integrity.